Pratistayam Tat-Sannidhau Vairatyagaha Ahimsa Pratistayam Tat-Sannidhau Vairatyagaha. Ahimsa Pratistayam Tat-Sannidhau Vairatyagaha. I have this sutra written out in the Devanagari. Don't worry if you're not as familiar. Just stick with it and try to kind of connect the sounds and the shapes together, even if just visually for now, right? I'm gonna go ahead and break out the words here. So Ahimsa Pratistayam, and I'm gonna write them out. So if you want to practice your calligraphy along with me, go ahead and take out a pen and we'll write together. So Ahimsa Pratistayam is made up of two parts. First we have Ahimsa, which starts with the A. And then we have Ha, but with the E, so we've got to draw the staff for the E part first. And then the Ha. And then I'm going to draw that flag for the He, so that we have He. Ahimsa, or Ahim. And then we have the Sa. And long is that extra staff. Ahimsa. Now, Pratistayam. So we start with a Pa. It's combined with a Ra, and that's that little symbol there. Pra. Again, we have the T, so we have to draw the staff of the I first. I know it takes a little bit of a rework in your brain, in my brain, because, you know, we're used to the syllables sort of moving left to right, but in this case, we kind of have to flip it around. So, T, that's Ta, turns into a T, Prati, and then the Sha is actually connected to that Ta. So we're going to draw it as a combined consonant. So you can see it's sort of the body of the Sha and the body of the Ta kind of smushed together. Don't worry about it for now. You can study the rules of consonant combination later. We again have a long A, so Pratishta, long A, and then we have Ya, long A, Ya. Pratistayam. So I'm breaking those out of their combination just so that we can see the words that we're working with. And then down here we have Tat-Sannidhau, which breaks out into Tad, which I'm going to write now. So that's Ta and Da. But, you know, since it would normally be tada, tada, but it's not here, it's tad. We write this little marking that indicates that we drop the short that would normally be inferred here. So we get tad. And then we have Sannidhau. Here's the Sa. Oops, that needs to connect. So Ni, right? So we know we have to include that staff before we get to the consonant. It's so confusing. It's still confusing to me. Sometimes I end up having to add it in later because I forget to write it first, right? So Then we have na and na smushed together into a compound. So sa-ni, sa-ni, and then da, and that da gets a different vowel, so it's going to be Tat-Sannidhau here. And the staff with the two flags indicates the ow. Ow. And then we have Vaira-tyagaha, which splits actually quite nicely into Vaira. So here's Va. Two flags makes it Vai. Here's Ra. No modification makes it Ra. So Vaira. Tyagaha. So Ta plus Ya. Tya, except we're going to add a long A, so it needs an extra staff. So Tya. And then this is the Ga. And it has a little aspiration at the end, as indicated there. So Tyagaha. Okay, so that's how the words break out from their little groupings. And from there, we can start to go into some of the definitions. I think I'll stay in blue here. So we have Ahimsa, which is made up of Hinsa, which means to harm or to hurt or to injure. And then adding the in this case means it's a negation. It's not always that way, so just be careful while you're learning words that you don't automatically assume, because sometimes it is and sometimes it's just the beginning of a word, in other words. So in other words. So ahimsa means non-harming. Non-harming. Oh well, I wanted to switch colors. Yes, purple sounds good. And then we have Pratistayam. I'll just quickly write it again. You can practice along too if you want. Oops, I made a boo-boo. Pratistayam. So Pratistayam is actually a pretty cool word. So I want to look at Pratistayam just a little bit more closely. Here, I think we can use this sheet. Oh, it's the Ahimsa sheet, so that works out. So we have the word Pratistayam. Yeah. Yeah, so I was looking this up, and this comes from the word Pratistayam, and we know from this month's focus of the month, which has to do with asana, stira, sukham, asana. Stira is that same root of sta. So we have that same root, which means standing or abiding or to stand firm, right? So that's our root. And it becomes Pratistayam when we add the prefix prati, which means, interestingly enough, to move towards, which I find, to me at least, it almost emphasizes this fact that we're practicing something, right? We're moving towards a state of standing firm in our Ahimsa practice, in our practice of extending our non-harming towards others, right? So I thought that was a really interesting word sort of combination. This idea of moving towards a state of being steady and standing firm in our practice. So let's flip it back. Oops, losing a little grip here. Okay. So typically we translate it as, to be established in or to be grounded in, right? That idea of standing firm in our convictions and in our practice. So let's say establishing, or established, sorry. Oh yeah, establishing, that's right. Yeah. Or standing firm, or etc. Right, then we have tad, which means that, as in that, and it changes to tat because of its proximity to sa, so there's some word combining and sound combining going on in there. And then we have Tat-Sannidhau, sa, ni, thou. Tat-Sannidhau means in the presence of, or to be in proximity to. So let's write in the presence. And then we have vaira. We change it to vai. Ra, no change, vaira. Vaira means hostility. And lastly, tyagaha. Whoops, I should be capping along the way. Sometimes I get a little ambitious and I forget to cap along the way. Tyagaha means giving up, but when I looked this up, we're going to write giving up here for a reason. But when I looked up tyagaha, I also found that it means giving up in the sense of sacrificing or renunciation, right? So renouncing or sacrificing of any hostility, right? Which I thought was an interesting sense of the word. So we have non-harming, we have establishment. We're going to say establishment. Yeah, because it's a noun. So establishment rather than a verb, like establishing. Establishing that in the presence, hostility, giving up. Now, word order in Sanskrit is a bit different. We don't rely on word order to make sense grammatically of the statement. Instead, it's the form that the words take that dictate the grammar. So I know it's a little funky in terms of word order because we're used to thinking that way. But the commentary from Vyas Houston is upon being established in ahimsa, or non-hurtfulness, there is a relinquishing or a giving up of hostility. And he says, in the presence of that, practice being ahimsa. Now, in many other translations and commentaries, it has a slightly different take. Both in Sri Brahmananda's commentary and in our very own Jivmukti chant book, we take it to mean that one who is established in ahimsa, or non-harming, that in their presence that hostility dissipates, or there's like a giving up of hostility in the presence of someone who's established in ahimsa. You see how those are slightly, like, two slightly different takes on the same meaning, right? And it's a little bit like any kind of translation or decoding, is that there is an element of almost poetry going on, right? So both meanings have their way of being correct and their way of giving us some information about what it means to practice ahimsa. And I like this idea that we're sort of giving up our hostility in order to be established in ahimsa, but also the idea, Sri Brahmananda and Sharon's version, also the idea that when we truly relinquish harmful thoughts, words, and actions, that the hostility around us seems to dissipate. It seems to be less in the presence of someone who is firmly established in ahimsa, which is interesting. We could ask ourselves, is that true? To what extent is that true? In what cases is that true? Is it that the person practicing ahimsa has a different view of the hostility going on around them? Do they have an understanding of the circumstances that is somehow not hostile? You know what I mean? If we bring emptiness into the question, perhaps one who is established in ahimsa perceives what usually we would perceive as hostility differently, right? So generally both translations have something to offer and some insight to sort of use our intuition with. And I hope this gives you a good jumping off point for understanding the sutra. I am also learning, so if there's any part of this that I misspoke or misunderstood, that's entirely my fault. I'm also on my Sanskrit journey,